Associate Dean, ITFA University, IBS.
Dr. Ankita, we lost your voice. Okay, I suppose she has some network issue with her. Let me introduce our guest, Dr. S.K. Gupta. But before I introduce our honorable guest, Dr. S.K. Gupta, I would like to invite our Dean, Dr. Anand Bethapudi, to share a couple of words of motivation with us. Dr. Anand, over to you.
Yeah. So good afternoon, you all. Respected today's guest speaker, Dr. S.K. Gupta ji, a senior cost accountant, and also he is the managing director of RVO of Institute of Cost Accountants of India. And my dear colleagues and senior professors, Dr. Ankita Srivatsam ma'am, Dr. Raghavendra Sharma ji, and all my students, both seniors and juniors of MBA students. Really, it's a very immense pleasure and happiness to participate this webinar. So I welcome formally our Dr. S.K. Gupta ji to this webinar. And I also appreciate the efforts of Dr. Ankita Srivatsam, who has been taking care of this financial and finance department. So really it's a pertinent topic, which is essential for the upcoming managers to be an effective manager. So I wish this webinar would be a great success. And at this point of time, I request Dr. S.K. Gupta ji, please visit our campus whenever you happen to come here.
Sure,
and also please take more number of lectures.
Yeah,
we need
sure.
people like you. You are just like a mentor to us.
That's
So
okay.
please, whenever you find time, please,
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
the madam and Raghavendra sir, Dr. Ankita madam will coordinate with
Yes,
you.
sir. Yes, sir.
So thank you, sir. Thank you. I hope this webinar would be a great success. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Dr. Anand. It is my kind privilege to introduce Dr. S.K. Gupta. Dr. S.K. Gupta is a postgraduate in commerce. He's a gold medalist, FCS, FCMA, PhD in corporate governance with over 40 years of extensive experience in corporate experience in leadership positions with various public and private sector organizations in the domain of finance, costing, internal audit, legal, and company secretarial functions. He has dealt with mergers and acquisition, corporate restructuring, anti-dumping duty, and corporate governance mechanisms. Currently, Dr. Gupta is the Managing Director of Registered Valuers Organization in the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. He was earlier Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of IPA of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. Dr. Gupta has chaired and addressed a large number of national and international seminars and conferences. He is a prolific writer. He has written over 200 articles and research papers, which are regularly published in various professional journals. He is currently guiding 5 PhD scholars. He has also conducted management development programs, both in-house and for various companies also. Dr. Gupta plays flute. He has released an album of songs and bhajans played by him on flute. I'm sure today's session is going to be a musical odyssey with Dr. Gupta. It was my kind privilege to introduce Dr. Gupta. Dr.
Thank
Gupta,
you so
over
much,
to you.
sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Dr. Anand Bethapudi, Madam Ankita Srivastav, Dr. Raghavendra Kumar, and dear students. It is my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon for a short session on corporate governance, why it's important, why it matters for the companies today. It's always been important, but its importance has greatly enhanced in the current times on account of various changes that have taken place in the world around us. So what I propose is I'll make a formal presentation on the topic for about 45-50 minutes or so, and I'll have the floor open for any question answered towards the end of the session for about 10 to 15 minutes. So let me just share my presentation, please. Just give me a second. So we are talking about corporate governance, which is, in my view, the real success mantra in today's business world. The world is changing. It's not only on account of COVID-19 pandemic situation that the world has been facing for over the last 2 years, but generally the kind of changes that we have witnessed over the period of last about 2 or 3 decades, these have been very, very deep, very, very significant, and very, very uncertain and very deep-rooted kind of thing. Today we see that it's a VUCA world. I'm sure all of you would have heard of this acronym. The world today is very, very vulnerable. It's highly uncertain. It's very complex, and it's very, very ambiguous. And that makes the business world a very, very uncertain, very ambiguous, very, very fizzy kind of situation in which the businesses are existing. Moreover, the kind of business models that we see in the marketplace today, which are mushrooming all over the world, these are very, very disruptive, unheard of till about a few decades back. To give you a few examples, today we are living in a world where the world's largest travel car company does not own a single car. You look at the balance sheet of the company, they don't have even one single car being recorded as asset of the company, but then that's the largest world's travel car company, that's Uber. We live in a world where the world's largest travel lodging company does not own a single hotel room, Airbnb. World's largest retailer, Amazon, does not own a single brick and mortar store. These are very, very disruptive business models, which were kind of unheard of till about a few decades back. Moreover, when you look at the performance of these companies, especially in terms of financial performance, many of these businesses have profitless turnover. They have a good enough top line, but end of the day, there is no profit which these companies are earning. Or you may have companies where they have cashless profit. They might have a good enough bottom line, but end of the day, there's no liquidity or there's no cash. But in spite of these two kind of constraints or limitations that the businesses are facing, especially the new startup businesses, their valuations are soaring very, very high. Look at the Zomato IPO, which hit the market just about 2 weeks back. In terms of profitability, the company is incurring huge loss. The company is deeply into debt, but in terms of the market valuation, the company's valuations are soaring very, very high. These are very, very disruptive models, which were not there till about 1 decade, maybe 2 decades, maybe 3 decades back in neither any part of the world for that matter. India started off with its journey of LPG, which is liberalization, privatization, and globalization in the year 1991. And ever since then, there have been huge changes which have been taking place in the business landscape of India. It's not only in terms of measuring the increased or enhanced level of GDP, but also in terms of number of businesses being set up, the kind of scale at which the businesses are operating, the kind of FDI flowing into the country, the kind of Indian businesses going abroad, setting up businesses abroad. There are a lot of changes which are taking place all across in all dimensions. So before getting to the main concept of corporate governance, I just want to give you a broad premise, a broad landscape kind of thing, and a broad backdrop as to in what kind of situation and what kind of circumstances the businesses are operating in today's business world. So that's the broad landscape which I want to first paint, and then take up my brush and then detail and discuss with the concept of corporate governance. So we discussed about disruptive business models. There is a shifting economic power. I mean, at one point of time, Russia used to have a lot of importance in the world economy. But ever since it was broken down into certain parts, China emerged as kind of a superpower. But even then, United States also was giving a tough competition. But then overall, now things are reshaping and things are realigning all over the world. You know, India's GDP as of now is said to be around 2.8 trillion US dollars. Do you know where is US? US is at around 22-23 trillion US dollars, almost about 8 times that of India. And where is China? China is at about 15, 16 trillion US dollars. That's about 2/3 of the US. So there is a shift of economic power taking place on account of the policy of deglobalization. The trend of deglobalization has started permeating the business world. Ever since the recession of 2007-2008, which led to collapse of Lehman Brothers and which was a subprime crisis, the mortgage crisis that hit the world market in 2007-2008, when the world came out of that recession around the time of 2011-2012, the entire mindset and thinking in the business world, even at the political level, had changed. And all the countries virtually thought and they started thinking they got to protect the national interest. No more globalization, no more blind globalization. They actually started going into deglobalization, keeping in view the larger national interest of their own countries, of their own economies. Technological revolution, as we all are aware of, you talk about machine learning, big data, artificial intelligence, data analytics, all these technologies, emergence of internet, emergence of mobile phone has drastically, dramatically changed the way we live and the way we work in the companies in today's world. I was reading a research paper which says that any two persons on this planet, any two persons, wherever they might be residing, A and Z, they are just 4 clicks away. A can be on the LinkedIn, he is linked to B. B is on the LinkedIn, he is linked to C. C is on the LinkedIn, he is connected to D. So A gets connected to D like that. So any two persons on this planet today, the kind of technology that we have, they are just 4 clicks away from each other. This is tremendous potential that we have in the business world for the implementation of technological policies, technological practices, and the use of technology. At the same time, environmental issues have become very, very important. The climate change, the Paris Agreement on climate change, some of the countries walked away from there, including India. That's for political reasons, but all of us are aware of the global warming and the impact it's likely to have on the whole civilization living on this particular planet if it is not controlled. Therefore, environmental protection has also become one of the key concerns for most of the businesses across the world. Then we have changing value system. The values are changing. They are changing from country to country, and within a particular country, within a particular region, the value system, the societal pattern is changing. We have changing customer expectations. They are no longer satisfied with the concept of customer satisfaction. I think the marketing people know all about that. You've got to now focus on customer delight. That's going one step forward. The difference between the two lies in the fact that when you say customer satisfaction, you are trying to provide value to the customers as per their expectations. But when you talk about customer delight, it says you provide value to the customers beyond their expectations. Even beyond what they're expected to get out of the product or the service that you are going to provide to them, they're expecting little more than that. They're expecting even more than that. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic situation has entirely changed and impacted the whole humanity. It has impacted lives, it has impacted livelihood, and it has also impacted lives of the poor. Many businesses have collapsed during this period of time. Of course, there have been sectoral impacts. Some of the sectors, some of the industries have hugely benefited by COVID-19 pandemic, but many of the businesses have been hugely disrupted, and many of the businesses have also had to close down on account of the impact, the negative impact of COVID-19 pandemic situation. Now, this is the backdrop of the world today in terms of individual lives that we live for ourselves as individuals, as well as for the businesses spread across the world. The startups are mushrooming all across the world. Silicon Valley is known for its startup businesses, the kind of incentives that they provide, and the number of startups that start from there. But India is ranked number 2 in the world today in terms of startup nursery. Number 2, we are number 2 in terms of number of startups which are hitting the world market, which are coming into existence in the Indian situation. But there is difference in terms of mindset. In Silicon Valley, someone who starts a startup and he fails, and he then ventures into another startup and he again fails, he's considered a great guy. Well, he might not have succeeded in putting up 2 of his startups into the marketplace, but then he would have amassed a lot of experience, a lot of rich experience, great learnings. But in India, the mindset as of now is yet slightly different. If someone has ventured into a startup and he has failed, and he ventured into another startup and he has failed, it's kind of taken as a stigma. And if he wants to get back to a job or employment, it becomes very, very difficult for him in Indian scenario to get back to a job because of the stigma of having failed in 1 or 2 startups. Mindset difference is there, but nonetheless, there are huge number of startups mushrooming in the Indian environment as of today. So this is the broad premise and the broad landscape in which the business world is today passing through. Huge vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, but at the same time, very, very disruptive business model. Now, you would have studied Companies Act or the Companies Law. It must be one of the papers that must be there in your syllabus or curriculum as part of your MBA program. You know, we have broadly 2 types of companies which can be set up as per the Companies Act 2013. One which is known as a private limited company, and the other one which is known as a public limited company. A private limited company can be started off by a minimum of 2 persons, 2 members, and this company can have a maximum of 200 members. Minimum 2, maximum 200 members. But the only restriction on this company, but which is a very serious nature, is that this company or a private limited company cannot access the market for funding, cannot come out with an IPO, cannot come out with public issue of shares. But at the same time, because it's a private limited company, the word limited is very important. That means the liability of all the members of the company is limited to the extent of the investment made by each one of them. Whatever might happen to the company, whatever kind of losses that might be there in the company, you cannot be called upon to contribute to the company's assets or distribution profile 1 single rupee more than what you have already committed, because the liability is limited. On the other hand, we have public limited companies in which the minimum number required to form a company is 7 and maximum there's no limit. Reliance Industries Limited has 34 lakh shareholders. Infosys has 36 lakh shareholders. TCS has 42 lakh shareholders, huge numbers. But the minimum number of members required is just about 7. And the main advantage of forming a public limited company is that it can access the market. It can source the funds for running of its operation by way of an IPO, initial public offering. That's where you issue shares to the general public by which you collect the funds required for carrying on of your business operation. Now, in both of these 2 kinds of scenarios, whether a private limited company or a public limited company, there is a divorce between the owners and the managers. Owners of the company are the members of the company, which are very small in number in case of a private limited company, which are very, very large in case of a public limited company. They are the real owners, but they cannot run the company together because they are all scattered all over, not only nationally, but even internationally. Therefore, the way out is that these owners of the business, who are the real owners of the business, they employ certain managers to operate, regulate, monitor, control, run the company on their behalf. And these agents of these owners are technically called the directors of the company. Individually as directors and collectively as the board of directors. So there is a divorce between ownership and management. Management of the company is run by a handful of people. How many directors can be there in a company? In a company, the company that provides a maximum number of 15 persons to be directors. You can have more than 15 directors also. There's no bar. But the only requirement is that if you want to go beyond 15, you got to take approval of the government Ministry of Corporate Affairs. You have to justify. You already have such a large number of people as directors. What do you want to induct 1 or 2 more? If you are able to justify no issue. You can still have more number of directors on the board of the company. Now, how these directors run the affairs of the company, because they are supremo, they are agents of the real owners of the business, who are the shareholders, who are the members of the company, running into lakhs in case of public limited company. How should these agents of the owners, called as directors, collectively known as board of directors, what kind of policies they should pursue, what kind of agenda they should pursue, how should they run the company in the best interest of all the stakeholders? That's all about corporate governance. Corporate means company, governance means how do you govern that company? Who will govern that company? Just like a sole proprietorship, where the owner and the management is same, unlike a sole proprietorship, in the case of a company, there is a complete divorce between owners and managers. Now, so we must make sure that the managers of the company or the management of the company, directors of the company, should not be running the company for their own benefit at the discredit or at the non-interest of the stakeholders. That has got to be taken care of. And one way of taking care of that is by having good governance practices being operative, being implemented in the company concerned. So corporate governance is the way an organization is managed. It includes various policies. It includes various practices that directly or indirectly affect or impact its various performance parameters in the context of normally accepted social, ethical, moral standards of the society and the laws of the land. That's important. What kind of policies you follow in the HR domain, in the marketing domain, in the finance domain? Are you following IFRS? In the HR domain, are you following best practices so far as talent acquisition, talent retention is concerned? And in all the other areas, you've got to be following policies and practices which are duly accepted across the world in terms of social, ethical, and moral standards of the society. And also, you have to be statutorily bound to comply with all the laws and regulations of the country, whichever are prevailing in India. So all companies in India are regulated by the Companies Act 2013. You also have SEBI regulations. You also have LODR, listing obligations and disclosure requirements of companies for all those companies which are listed at BSE, NSE, or any other currently stock exchange. Corporate governance is a modern expression for an issue which companies worldwide have faced for decades, that is accountability. Owners have given the right to run the affairs of the business to a set of people, handful of people known as board of directors. If they don't pursue the agenda of the company, or if they don't follow the objectives of the company in the right earnest, how can we hold them accountable? How can we have the element of accountability built into the entire structure and the architecture of management and operation of the company? That's the crux of which we are talking about in terms of corporate governance. So at the most basic level, micro level, it is all about, corporate governance is all about how those entrusted with day-to-day management of the company's affairs are held accountable to stakeholders. If there is a loss, somebody has to be held accountable. If there is profit lesser than expected, someone has to be held accountable. Nobody is saying that you can't go wrong. We are operating in a world which is driven by the market forces. There's huge competition existing in a marketplace. It's but natural for some of the plans of some of the companies to not work out the way they were expected to be. It is but natural in this kind of scenario for some of the businesses to fail. It is but natural in such case for some of the companies, they should be allowed to exit. For whatever reason, in spite of best intention, these companies have not been able to face the competition, or technology could have been a challenge, finances could have been a challenge, management could have been a challenge. Thus, there could be a failing business, but that business might still be viable. Or you could have a failing business which also is unviable. If there is a failing business, which is a viable business, one of the cause of viability of the business could be its technology, its finances, its branding in a marketplace, but the gap between the two, why the company is failing, maybe governance is not right. Maybe governance is not appropriate in that particular case. So if we are somehow able to take care of the governance part, then probably we can make that company viable all over again. It can be revived. Normally in accounting, we follow the concept of the going concern. That means once a company is established, it is likely to continue in the market for an indefinite period of time. That's the basic premise on which all accounting is done. Accounting and finance, that's the basic assumption. There are times when companies face hardship and they have to go into winding up and liquidation. That's okay. But the basic premise that we always follow is a going concern concept. So how to maintain the going concern concept for the company in spite of any kind of challenge that may be faced by a company at a given point of time, it all depends upon how well you are governing that company. It all depends upon the governance structure of the company. Why corporate governance is important? There have been proliferation of financial scandals and crises. In India, it all started off with, maybe you can talk about Harshad Mehta's scam of 92, and then probably you can talk about Satyam of 2007, 2008. After that, there have been lots of cases. Even Tata's had a fight with Mr. Mistry. ICICI Bank lost Chanda Kochar in spite of doing so very well at a given point of time. But in terms of governance, there were certain kind of failures which happened at a given point of time. So because of proliferation of financial scandals and crises, not only in India, but worldwide, the importance and the focus on corporate governance across the world has increased. The investors need to have trust in the company. Then only they would be willing to put their money in a particular venture. In order to create a trust, the company's management must have credibility. They must be credible people. The company must be credible in the sense that the company delivers what it promises in terms of quality, in terms of speed, in terms of timing, in terms of services. You've got to have credibility for yourself. And that's where the corporate governance plays a very important role in building up the required level of credibility for any company. Globalization has increased cross-border investment opportunities. If any foreign company wants to invest in India, there are two routes available. There are two alternate options available. One is that the company can directly make investment by way of FDI, that's foreign direct investment, or the company can possibly come through PMS, that's portfolio management scheme of SEBI. You can get yourself registered under PMS with SEBI. All financial institutional investors, they are registered with SEBI under PMS, and that's how the funds flow into the country. Similarly, an Indian company wanting to venture abroad, wanting to set up their manufacturing facility abroad, has to follow a certain guidelines of RBI under FEMA 2002, but then there's no bar. So there has been a lot of cross-border investment taking place both into India as well as from India onto other countries and other regions of the world. Now, when you have investment made in a different region, the risk and the uncertainty increases so far as the point of view of the owners or the stakeholders is concerned. They would require enhanced level of credibility. They would require enhanced level of loyalty and trust on the part of the management's functioning. And that's where the corporate governance principle becomes very, very important. Investors are not willing to invest in countries and companies that are corrupt, prone to fraud, which are poorly managed, and which lack sufficient protection for investors' rights. In fact, there is a concept of ESG investment emerging very fast on the landscape now. ESG, E stands for environment, S stands for societal concerns, and G stands for governance. Those companies which are focusing on ESG are easily able to access funds internationally. They're able to access funds at cheaper cost. They're able to access talent. They're able to retain talent, and they're able to have a lot of confidence and a lot of trust of the investors and other stakeholders. In fact, many investors have become choosy. They would like to make investment. They have lots of money, but not blindly. They would only like to put their money in companies which are following the principles of ESG, environment, societal concern, and governance. In other words, it's not only profit which is important. We talk about triple bottom line. That's about people, planet, and profits. You got to take care of people. The company's operations must be beneficial for the society as a whole, must be beneficial for the mankind as a whole. You must take care of the environment. As a result of the operations of the company, the environment must not be degraded. We must leave the planet as it is for our future generations and not destroy it for the future generation. Of course, profit is important for sustenance, for growth, and enhanced sustainability of the company. Profit, of course, is important. To these 4 P's, now the 4th P has been added to the 3 P's: people, planet, profits, pandemic. Now that's the new dimension which has been added. In this scenario, you also got to take care of building up a resilient business model. All the businesses have been impacted by COVID-19. Some businesses to a lesser extent, some businesses have been impacted to a greater level on account of resiliency in their business model. Going forward, you never know when such kind of a crisis might erupt in future all over again. So all the companies are now rethinking their strategy, rethinking their business model, and trying to create a business model which is resilient so that they are able to stay afloat in any kind of situation, any kind of challenge that they might face in the future. The key aspects of corporate governance, some of the things which are common are, even though all the countries have some kind of a law regulating the functioning of the companies in terms of corporate governance practices. In UK, you have a law. In US, you have a law. Australia, China, Singapore, India, we have a law. Everywhere there is a law. But basic principles of the corporate governance principles and practices remain the same. And they are just 3 or 4, but very important, the kind of pillars of corporate governance architecture. First is the conduct of the company, the conduct of the management of the company, the conduct of the board of directors of the company. It must be ethical. Ethics. And it's not ethics in the sense of you have a code of conduct. SEBI mandates all the companies in India to have a code of conduct and host that code of conduct on the website of the company, and also affirm your compliance with the code of conduct every year. You are required to give your confirmation to stock exchanges and to SEBI. But having a code of conduct is not enough. What is required is living the code of conduct. Let me share a real example of real life situation which I faced. I'm also an independent director in few companies, including 1 or 2 listed companies. In one of the companies where I'm a director, the company was celebrating its Founders Day. So they decided to call all the directors, all the employees, and celebrate the Founders Day. And then as it happens in a formal situation like that, each one of the directors was required to give a kind of a speech, a brief 5-7 minute speech. I was allotted about 5 minutes. I'm not going to share an entire 5-minute speech of mine, but I'll only share a few lines of that. I decided to talk about code of ethics and the ethical conduct of the company in that meeting. I asked 4 basic questions to the people present there in that auditorium, a strong crowd of about 500 employees of the company. My first question to the crowd was, do you know that your company has a code of conduct? Everyone raised their hand. Some people raised both of their hands because they said, sir, it is on the website, I've seen it. It is there everywhere in the company. It is there on the notice board. It is also there in the factory. We know that we have a code of conduct. I said, very good. My next question was, have you read it? Some of the hands came down. When I asked the second question, have you read it? Some of the hands came down. Then my third question to the audience was, have you understood it? Quite a few number of hands came down this time. When I asked the third question, have you understood it? You have read it, but have you understood it? Then my last question to the auditorium, to the audience there was, do you live by it? Believe me, There were barely few hands which were up there in the audience at that point of time when I asked them the question, do you live by it? Living the code of conduct is the crux of the corporate governance. Having a code of conduct saying that we have a written rule book, not enough. Unless it becomes DNA, it becomes part of your day-to-day functioning, unless it is imbibed in true spirit in each one of the individual working within the company, right from the chowkidar standing at the gate, right up to the managing director or chairman, I don't think it's going to work. Living the code of conduct requires total commitment, and living the code of conduct requires your full commitment, and it has to become part of your DNA. What is meant by living the code of conduct? I would like to give another real life example. We organize various seminars and conferences, my organization where I'm currently working. Before COVID, I think this was June 2019 probably, we conducted a national conference in Chennai. And in that conference, we had a lady, a senior executive from one of the company in Delhi who was a key speaker. He was one of the speakers in that conference. As is the normal protocol in any seminar or conference, right in the beginning, you welcome all the guests with a bouquet of flowers or with a planter, whatever. And then once everyone has spoken, you give them some kind of a memento, a token of appreciation, gratitude, whatever. That's a normal protocol that we follow, all seminars, all conferences across the world. In this seminar also, after everyone had spoken, memento was distributed. This lady got up, who was sitting next to me. She received the memento very, very humbly. But as soon as she sat down, she whispered in my ears and she said, Dr. Gupta, what is the cost of whatever you are giving to me inside this gift wrapped box? I was startled. I said, Madam, why are you bothered about? This is just a token of appreciation, gratitude for us, for you having come all the way from Delhi to have enlightened us on a particular subject, because being an expert, your lecture has been extremely well accepted. Why should you bother about that? But that lady said, no, my company has a code of ethics, a code of conduct. And as part of that code of conduct and ethics, there is a small section on gifts. And there is a threshold prescribed under that policy. That is, you can receive a gift from someone up to a particular level of monetary value. So please tell me, what is the value of whatever you are giving to me inside this box? If that value is beyond that particular threshold, sorry, I will not be able to accept that. Somehow I was able to pacify her. But look here, here was a lady who was living the code of conduct of her company. Raising the question then and there on the dais, she said, I will not be able to accept it if it is beyond the threshold limit fixed for the gift policy of my company as part of the code of ethics. Ethics, very important. And you have to create loyalty amongst your stakeholders by not only being ethical, but also showing that you are ethical and also truly reflecting your operation in an ethical manner. So for becoming ethical, one of the practices that companies need to follow is disclosures. You must disclose what is happening in the company, good, bad, not so good, not so bad, whatever. You got to disclose all that to the real owners of the company, because you are not the real owner. You are agent of the company appointed as director to manage, govern, control, monitor the operations of the company. You must disclose, even if the going is not good, even if the going is tough, even if the going is very, very tough and the company is passing through a rough patch, no issues. It is business. It is driven by the market sentiment. You can't help it, but at least keep the owners of the business informed by way of appropriate disclosures. There are certain disclosures which are mandatory as part of the accounting standards. There are certain disclosures which are mandatory as part of the SEBI guidelines, and there are certain disclosures which are mandatory as part of listing agreement of the companies with the stock exchanges. You must appropriately follow the governance rules in terms of disclosures. You must be very, very fair in your dealings with all stakeholders. All stakeholders. You must be fair to your suppliers. You must be fair to your customers. You must be fair to your employees. You must also be fair to your bankers, creditors, government. Appropriately pay all taxes which are due to be paid by the company. That's all about fairness, fairness and equity. You must not benefit one section of the stakeholders at the cost of the other, at the cost of another section. You must be very, very equitable. You must follow the principle of natural justice and equity in all your decision, in all your operation, in all your implementing policies. Accountability. You have a lot of power. As board of directors, you have a lot of powers. You can do a lot of things. Again, you must have studied Companies Act at least to a certain extent. There are various powers which can be exercised by the board of directors themselves. There are just few things which can be done not only by board of directors, but only after taking approval of the shareholders in the annual general meeting. But majority of the things can be done by the board of directors. When you have so much of power given to you by the Companies Act, by the SEBI regulation, and by the owners, the kind of trust that they have vested in you, you must be responsible for your acts. You must be held accountable for your acts. Why not? Power, that means authority, and responsibility, they have to go hand in hand. Responsibility and power, and the kind of power that you have to exercise in running of the corporate venture, it must be correlated with each other. You must be held accountable. And of course, equity, I talked about equal treatment of all stakeholders. And I also told you all the companies have regulations and laws which mandate appropriate corporate governance practices to be followed by various companies. But these are the OECD principles of corporate governance. Ensuring the basis for an effective corporate governance framework, you must fully acknowledge and fully protect the rights of the shareholders and the key owners of the company. You must ensure equitable treatment of all stakeholders. You must allow stakeholders to take part in the various operations of the company, in various decision-making situations of the company as part of corporate governance. Disclosures must be there so that the company is transparent in its operations. And then you also have to be responsible and accountable for whatever happens in the company. Corporate governance framework should ensure strategic guidance of the company by the board, effective monitoring of management by the board of directors, and the board's accountability to the company and the stakeholders. As a collective body, commonly known as board of directors, you are responsible for providing a strategic direction to the company. Where you are, where you want to go. You must have a vision. You must have a mission. You must have certain objectives, and all your efforts, actions, and decisions, they must be in the furtherance of those particular pursuits that you would have embellished and that you would have enshrined in your vision, mission, and the objectives of the company. You must provide strategic guidance, and you must also effectively monitor the functioning of the company, but at the same time, remain accountable to the various stakeholders of the company. There is a KPMG India Fraud Survey, which says that 71% of the frauds which happen in the corporate world were due to weakening of values, the basic value system. The kind of value system that you have, the kind of value system you believe in, your kind of upbringing, your background, where you come from, what kind of value system you would like to apply, implement in that particular company. Most of the frauds which take place are on account of personal greed, laxity of controls, and also due to weakening of the value system of the company. The 27% are on account of collusion between employees and management. 18% of the frauds are due to poor or non-existent corporate ethics. And 18% of the frauds happen due to management overriding internal controls. Not relying on the internal controls, the kind of internal control system that you have, you try to strive, overcome that, and you try to manipulate them for your own benefit. That's how the frauds happen. Corporate governance is not a rule book. As per SEBI regulations, every company, a public limited company, every year has to tick a checklist kind of thing and provide that report to SEBI and to stock exchange. That is a mandatory exercise that every public limited company has to do. But corporate governance is not a rule book. You can't have rules 1, 2, 3, 4 and then just tick them off. It must come naturally and instinctively. Most importantly, it must be a part of your wisdom. Otherwise, you can't follow it. Corporate governance cannot be purely regulatory. When Satyam happened, we already had SEBI. We already had all those kind of guidelines, even though the mechanism had been strengthened thereafter. But even at that point of time, we had all these regulations and policies. But in spite of all that, Satyam happened. So it must be taken out of the confines of the boardroom and instilled in the people all over your organization. Any outside person who visits the company office, first time he comes in contact with the receptionist. He or she, whosoever may be sitting at the front desk, is the first person any person coming from outside will come in contact with. The way he or she deals with that visitor, the corporate governance starts from there. It's not that corporate governance is only from the director's level. Nobody else can do anything about corporate governance. Corporate governance right now starts from the darban or from the chowkidar who opens the doors for you when you go to office in the morning. The way he behaves with the outsiders, his diction, his behavior is starting point for the corporate governance. And then it goes right up to the level of the board of directors, of course. Those companies which have good corporate governance mechanisms, they are rewarded by the market. They stand in a better position as compared to their competing companies. Survey suggests, research suggests that institutional investors are willing to pay as much as approximately 28% more for the shares of a well-governed company in emerging markets. I mean, when you come out with your IPO, your pricing can be higher if you have good corporate governance practices. And for those companies where the corporate governance practices are not robust, the architecture is not so very well structured, in that case, the companies will be able to access money at a higher cost. At the same time, they will not be able to get as much premium as the company following a good corporate governance practices will. The market valuation of the companies which follow good corporate governance practices is higher. That's what the research says. Whether it's 10%, 12% is part of the research. But as a general concept and notion, those companies which have good corporate governance practices, they have higher market valuation. Those companies are able to attract good people, good talented intellectual people. You know, today, you can have a company which has a balance sheet size of just about 100 crores, but its market valuation could be 2,000 crores. Quite possible. How is that possible? That's because on the balance sheet, you only show tangible assets. But the real value of the company might be coming from all other different types of capital. There is an evolving concept of integrated reporting. Maybe sometime I can have a session on this new evolving concept of corporate reporting. Integrated reporting says that it's not only financial capital which is important to be reflected in the company's performance. You must also look at 5 other different types of capital. Financial capital, human capital, social and relational capital, manufactured capital, environmental capital, and then financial capital. That means you must also take into account non-financial assets of the company, which provide a lot of value to the company. Your brand, your loyalty, your commitment of your customers, all these have huge value, which gets counted in market valuation, but it doesn't appear anywhere at all on the balance sheet of the company. That's why I said a company having a balance sheet size of 100 crores could have a market cap of about 2,000 crores. Quite possible. That's because the non-tangible things not being accounted for in the balance sheet is the reason why you have that kind of a gap. And a company having good corporate governance will also enjoy higher corporate brand equity. In India, the corporate governance is governed by various rules and regulations, which I have already mentioned. Some of the rules are mentioned under Companies Act 2013. Some of the rules and regulations emerge from SEBI guidelines, and some of the rules and regulations emerge from the agreement that you enter into with the stock exchange for listing of your shares. They have a LODR, which is known as Listing Obligations and Disclosure Requirements, LODR. There are certain guidelines which are enshrined for corporate governance under these regulations. For all these three things put together, what are the key requirements? I've just summarized in one single sheet. Every company must have an audit committee. Once you got to get your financial results approved by the board of directors, the CFO of the company cannot straight away take the financial results to the board of directors meeting. It has to first to be taken to audit committee, a committee consisting of independent directors, a committee consisting of people who have financial knowledge. They will vet the financial results and then recommend the approval of these financial results to the board of directors of the company. So there is a filtering which happens. It's not that CFO can manipulate anything and everything for that matter, because board of directors may not have time to go through each and everything as enshrined in the financial statements in detail. So there is a filter. It has to be filtered, first gone through by the audit committee before being put up before the board of directors for final ratification. Then there must be a nomination and remuneration committee. How directors are selected? Normally, in the Indian context, the normal practice is a company consists of board of directors who are all buddies. Buddies in the sense, I've started a business, or 4 people joined together, started a business. All 4 of us know a lot of people in the marketplace. I bring A, my friend, somebody else brings B, his friend, and all of us know each other very well. And we are kind of buddies, you know. Every morning we go for a walk together, but we are board of directors in one single particular company. Outside in the Western world, it doesn't happen like this. There, for each particular position on the board of directors, an advertisement is issued in the newspaper. Just as there is an advertisement for any other position to be filled in the company, there is an advertisement for appointment of independent directors. Then people will apply. Applications will be sorted out, shortlisted. Interviews will be held, and then a particular person is selected as a director. But India yet is far away from that kind of a culture, that kind of a process. But nonetheless, we are evolving very fast now. Some of the companies have started following this particular practice of selection of induction of directors. Independent directors. You must have on your board certain people who are not related to the owners of the business. Because if you have all buddies together, or if you have all family members of the owners together as board of directors in a company, well, there's nobody to challenge you. Any point of time, whatever you want to do, you will do. Because you have a gathering of people, or you have a set of people around you who are all your known people, all family members, all friends kind of thing. So there is a requirement in law to have people who are not directly or indirectly connected, related. They are not associates. They don't have any nexus, no connection with the owners of the business. These people are called independent directors. So they can look at the interest of the stakeholders in a better manner. There is a provision of having at least one women director in the company, because men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I mean, there's a very, very well-known book available in the market for that place. Each complement each other. I mean, males and females, they complement each other. Females have a different set of mind. I mean, some people think from left brain, some people think from right brain, and you must have an appropriate mix of women as well as men on the board so as to provide diversity of thoughts, diversity of decision making, diversity of ideas, so as to have a better board and so as to have better corporate governance practice. There is also a provision for a director to be appointed on the board of company who represents small shareholders. Each one of the shareholders, they cannot be part of the board of directors because of the limitation of 15 numbers there as per the law. But there is a provision that some of the shareholders, the smaller ones, they can get together, they can nominate one single person as their representative. And then that person becomes a director on the board of the company as their representative. Then there is a concept of whistleblower. if there is something wrong happening in some nook and corner of the company, and somebody gets to know about that, he should be allowed to raise his voice. He should be allowed to provide a complaint to somebody that I know that there is some wrong happening in some part of the company. This provision is called whistleblower or a vigil mechanism. This is also one of the requirements for good governance under SEBI guidelines. You must also have a stakeholder relationship committee. You must maintain at all times cordial relations with all the stakeholders, your customers, your suppliers, your shareholders, your bankers, your lenders. You must have very good relations, cordial relations with them. And for maintaining that, there has to be a subcommittee of the board known as Stakeholder Relationship Committee. For certain companies, the rules of CSR, corporate social responsibility, are also applicable, where a company is required to spend at least 2% of the profits of the company on CSR activities. For such companies, it is also mandatory to have a subcommittee of the board known as CSR committee. You must also have a risk management committee. The function of this committee is that since we are doing business in a VUCA world, where there is a lot of risk and uncertainty, there should be a small subcommittee of the board which looks at risk identification, risk assessment, risk monitoring, risk mitigation, and overall risk management. For looking at what all different kinds of risk the business is likely to be impacted by, and then taking appropriate measures, whichever are possible. There must be a separate committee, a subcommittee of the board, which is known as a risk management committee. All the committees that we have talked about 5-6 committees in the previous points, the chairman of all committees should be an independent director. The owner of the business cannot be chairperson of any of the committees which are mandated under regulations and law. The law requires that all committees, the chairman of that committee has to be an independent director. And disclosures are required in respect of various events. Some of these disclosures are annual, some of these disclosures are quarterly, just as every company is required to come out with financial results on a quarterly basis. Every quarter, every 3 months. You got to tell the public what has been the financial performance of the company. And some of the disclosures are even event-based or trigger-based. Suppose there is a board meeting which is likely to happen 5 days after or 7 days after, in which you are going to discuss mergers and acquisitions. The company is going in for M&A. You must inform the stock exchange. Before you send the notice for the board meeting, you must inform the stock exchange where the shares of your company are listed, that a meeting of board of directors is to take place on a particular date, in which one of the agenda item is to consider mergers and acquisitions. Then immediately after the meeting, whatever decision would have been taken, that is required to be immediately after the close of the meeting, required to be communicated back to BSE. Within minutes. If your meeting is closed at 5 o'clock, within 5-10 minutes, you've got to disclose to NSE BSE what has been the decision on that agenda regarding merger and acquisition proposed by the company. So there are disclosures which are on annual basis, disclosures on quarterly basis, and some disclosures are event-based, trigger-based, which have to be taken up immediately as soon as a particular event takes place. But legislation by itself would not work. Having a law, having various regulations, only legislation will not work. You have to have some kind of a framework architecture for monitoring activities of the company and also regulating their affairs, but only legislation will not work. The real issues that determine the quality of corporate governance are the issues of the heart. It has to be part of your DNA. No law, no rule, no rating can be an effective measure. You must believe in the efficacy of the concept of corporate governance. You must live the concept of corporate governance. And it has to be lived not only by the people sitting in the boardroom, but it has to be imbibed in the mindset of people at all hierarchical levels within the organization, right down to the position of Darban or a Chokidar or the front office manager. In fact, the concept of corporate governance is not new to India. In our Dharma books, we have been talking about corporate governance in very simple terms for long time back. We have the concept of Lok Sangraha, which means you must operate all the businesses in such a manner so as to extend the benefit to maximum number of people. Public good, greatest possible good for all the shareholders is Lok Sangraha. Dhanam, obviously, you must create wealth, but you must create wealth not by foul, not by frauds, but through competence and productivity. Swatantriya, independence. The board of directors must have independence to carry out the affairs of the company as agents on behalf of the stakeholders. But at the same time, you must have autonomy, independence, but at the same time, you must also have accountability and responsibility for anything that goes right or wrong in the company. Vishwasta, trust. You are trustees. The business doesn't belong to you. The factory that you are running as a board of director, it doesn't belong to you. You're only a trustee. So therefore, you must create an element and a bond of trust between yourself and the owners of the business, Vishwasta. Dharma Yuddha. Competition has always been there, right from times immemorial. Competition is bound to be there in future as well. What is required is it must be fair competition. You must not hit somebody under the belt. You must not hit somebody who is showing you a back. It must be a fair battle. It must be level playing field for all, and it must be fair competition. Vividhata, diversity. Innovation is the key. Which are the companies which are succeeding in today's marketplace, which are innovative and which are quickly adaptable to new and emerging market scenarios. So Vividhata is what we have been talking about in our Dharma books. The business must bring about variety depending upon the requirements of customers at a given point of time. They must continuously go for innovation and ensure flexibility in their approach. Corporate governance requires certain fundamental changes. If you want to imbibe corporate governance principles and practices in true sense in a given company, companies must change the way they operate and think. In any decision that the company takes, in some of the good companies, I'm talking about best practices, every decision that the company takes is first tested on the criteria of ESG. That's the litmus test that most of the companies, most of the good companies are doing today. Any decision that has to be taken, they test it out on the criteria or the litmus test of ESG. Is it good for the environment? Is it good for the society? Is it as per good governance practice or not? If not, they go back to their drawing board level and then try to modify the decision to the extent it is required so as to make it compatible with ESG. Government must establish appropriate institutional framework for corporate governance. SEBI has been continuously, I'm not saying strengthening, but broadening the concept of corporate governance by way of various regulations and rules. Even now, they have a concept paper which is out in the market. It's there on the SEBI website. Those of you who have interest can go at the SEBI website and finding out where they are proposing some new clause, some new changes which are being brought about in the corporate governance laws. And they have asked for public comments before they make it formal and before they make it mandatory for the companies to follow. They are asking for public comment. Corporate governance challenge lies in setting up a corporate structure that allows considerable freedom to the board of directors, but within the rule of the law. It's a very tightrope balancing which has to be done. If you don't allow freedom, even freedom to fail is part of the freedom. Why not? Because I don't control the market. If in spite of my best efforts, in spite of my best decision, my business is not doing so well, it could be on account of many different factors which are kind of uncontrollable. But still, I should have the freedom to be able to run the business as per my best efforts, as per my best decision. But this freedom has to be exercised within a given broad framework of rules and regulation proposed by the government, by SEBI, or by stock exchange. So what are the key takeaways from this brief session? Ethical practices and corporate governance in India are still evolving. There is resistance to transparency and adequate disclosure in substance. Though it exists in form, it lacks in many listed companies. People in India still try to hide information from stakeholders. Disclosures, they try to give minimum possible disclosure. And disclosure can also be misleading disclosure. I mean, you can camouflage the language in such a way that if there was a negative impact or incident which happened in the company, you can always camouflage the language in a way that you try to portray a positive aspect of the company, which is actually kind of a fraud. You are not providing true picture to the stakeholders of the company, which is not true disclosure, which is required or expected from a corporate entity. Nevertheless, the market is starting to reward good corporate governance. Expectations are rising as more and more companies participate in global economy, and there is growing evidence of the link between value creation and sound governance practices. Today, the concept of performance appraisal or measuring the performance of the company has overgone a 360-degree revolution. It's no longer profit that we look at. It's no longer profitability. It's no longer even EVA, economic value added. What we look at today in terms of performance of a corporate venture is value. Is the business creating value for the stakeholders? Is the business able to preserve that value over a period of time? Is the business able to enhance that value on a sustainable basis? Value creation, value preservation, value enhancement is the mantra in today's world. And for that, having good corporate practices is definitely a very important mechanism or an architecture which can help a company deliver value to the stakeholders and become kind of a darling for the stakeholders and the investors in the market. Corporate governance is not only a means to survive. It's not only required for you to survive in the marketplace, but it's a strategy to prosper in today's world. What do you want is surviving and thriving. So both survival, your survival in the marketplace going forward is going to depend upon what kind of level of corporate governance practices you follow in your company. At the same time, not only survival, you can expect to have your head just above the water, but if you want to raise your level and if you want to sustain on a long-term basis, then of course, corporate governance practices have to be imbibed and embellished and implemented in right spirit. Corporate governance is a dynamic process. The kind of concepts that we used to talk about corporate governance about 10 years back, things have changed. Globally, things have changed. And even they are evolving right now. As I told you, SEBI has come out with a consultative paper, which they have put up on their website for public comments, which had about 24 different things, 24 new things, which they want to bring about, changes here and there, so as to improve the corporate governance practices in the country. So it's a dynamic process and it is continuously evolving. And it has no boundaries or limits because we are living in a globalized world. Indian companies are venturing outside. We have foreign companies operating in India. So virtually it is boundaryless world that we are living in, where you have to match the best practices of the best companies in the world so as to be able to stay and achieve the target of $5 trillion economy, the call given by Mr. Modi, our Prime Minister. He gave a call of $5 trillion economy in 2020, and he said we'll achieve this by 2024. But at that point of time, we did not have the inkling of pandemic 19, COVID-19. Now, obviously, it seems difficult to achieve that target by 2024. It might be achieved in 2026 or 2027, but timelines are not important. Having a vision is what is most important. Moving from $2.8 trillion economy to a $5 trillion economy, that can happen only when The corporate sector contributes its might to the overall contribution in the generation of GDP. In the GDP of the country today, the share of agriculture is about 16%. The share of industry, the corporate sector, is about 30%, and 54% is contributed by the services sector. When India achieves the $5 trillion economy mark, whenever that happens, the proportion is likely to change to 20-20-60. 20% expected to come from agriculture, 20% from industry, and 60% likely to be contributed by the services sector. So corporate governance is simply the way you run the affairs of the company, and the basic tenets and the basic pillars of corporate governance are: you got to do business ethically, you must be very, very fair, you must have equitable treatment of all stakeholders, you must provide appropriate disclosures, whatever is happening in the company, and then you must also be accountable for your actions. You have a lot of power, you have a lot of authority, but along with the authority, it has to be balanced on the other side with responsibility and accountability. I think that's where I'll stop, and I'll be open for any questions that you may have on any of the aspects of corporate governance. Thank you so much.
Excellent presentation, sir. Friends, Akhilesh, are we allowing them to unmute themselves?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Anmol, if you have any question, you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. Am I
Good
audible, sir?
evening. Please go ahead. Yes.
Sir, this is Anmol Singh. So I
Yes.
guess I had a network issue, sir. So my question was like, sir, I've heard that society gives the license to businesses to exist and to run to the heights. And it can be amended or revoked at any time if businesses fails to live up to society's expectation. So would you throw some light on this statement?
Well, society means people who have invested in the company, in a particular corporate venture. Society is a broad word, but a subsection of that society, as I gave you an example, that Reliance Industries Limited has 34 lakh shareholders. These 34 lakh people or 34 lakh investors of the company, they form part of the society, of course. So they have given the license, means agency theory. I mean, commonly, if you go into the textbook, this is called the agency theory, where the owners are not able to manage the affairs of the business all by themselves because they are so large in number and they are so widely scattered across geographies, across different geographical locations. They appoint certain people as their agents, which is kind of license the society is giving to a business to carry on its operation. Of course, if the business is not being managed in an effective manner, shareholders can, in the meeting of the annual general meeting of the company, which happens mandatorily every year for a listed company, they can decide to close down the affairs of the company. That power definitely is in the hands of the owners of the business. So why should you give a chance for them? Because when a company gets closed, it's not a simple affair. There are a whole lot of people working in that company. There are a whole lot of families who are dependent on that company. If a company goes dead, I mean, the government suffers, society suffers, families suffer, households suffer, individuals suffer. It's not in the good interest of anyone to close down a going concern company. So why should you give that chance to society or to the stakeholder and shareholders to force the company to be liquidated? And that's the reason why you must follow principles of corporate governance so that you are able to survive and thrive, whatever be the situation, and maintain the going concern status of the company on a sustainable basis.
Excellent.
Thank you, sir. It was great listening to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ritin, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, sir. So my question is, sir, as from the research we have seen, there is a 10 to 12% increase in the valuation of a company through corporate governance. So as an analyst or as a student valuing a company, how we will identify the corporate governance of a company, whether the system is effective, whether it is reliable or not?
Sure. Probably we can have another session on overview of valuation. If time permits, I can deliver that. You can work it out. That's a very interesting area. So valuation is really picking up in India as of now, and valuation is required to be done whenever a company goes in for mergers and acquisition, even right shares, even bonus shares, even ESOPs, Anytime the company has to follow any of these actions, the valuation is required to be carried out. So normally in valuation of a company, we follow any of the three approaches or a mix of all the three approaches. One which is known as income approach. So what you do there is you look at what is the income profile of the company on an average basis after normalizing the results of the company for all exceptional items and exceptional events, and then you apply a certain multiple to work out the valuation of the company. I mean, it's technical, so I'll not be able to explain so briefly. It's slightly technical, but that's how we work out the value of the company. Second way is to look at the market. What is the market cap of the company? Market capitalization is number of outstanding shares of the company as at any given point of time multiplied by its current market price. That gives you market capitalization. Or you can look at the cost. How much would it cost me if I were to create the same size, the same structure, the same nature of business today? Replacement cost concept, if it is commonly known as, how much will it cost me? Now, in order to value, obviously you start with the financial factors, you start with the balance sheet, you look at the projections given by the company to you as a valuer, and in the balance sheet, as I told you, you will not factor intangible assets. Brand of the company, goodwill of the company, trademark, patents, copyrights, any of such assets will not be available. But there are financial techniques and models available by which we can value each one of these intangible factors. And one of the important section of the checklist that all the people follow in order to value a company, that separate section is known as a corporate governance check. There you check whether, first of all, the company fully complies with the rules and regulations of the Companies Act, the SEBI and the listing agreement, and not only complies with that in law, but also in spirit. And when I say, how do you check that? Whether the company applies that in spirit or not, it's a matter of judgment. Valuation itself is a judgment call. Valuation is not so simple that you have financial numbers and you do a financial model, input the data, and you get the result. Valuation is not so simple. Valuation is not about numbers. Valuation is actually, the numbers in the valuation are actually only the starting point. End of the day, you have to craft and weave a story around those numbers. When you craft a story around those numbers, weave a story around those numbers, that's how we get the valuation of the company. So to your direct answer to your question, there is a separate section of checklist that the valuers apply while valuing a company. There is a separate section to check the corporate governance level of the company. That's the answer to your question.
Excellent. Maybe Dr. Ankita, we can request Dr. Gupta for another session, maybe in the workshop mode. So
Yes, sir.
Anytime.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There are a few topics which are very in our mind, and as you have described the thing so well.
We'll talk offline, and I can work it out.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Definitely.
Expectations of industry from the students. I mean, that's a very, very good topic for all these people to prepare themselves for. And then valuation can be one more important topic to
yes,
look at.
So
we
valuation, yes.
We can talk offline. And
Sure. I will discuss it.
Excellent. Students, if you have any question, because we have the time scarcity, so but the session was very interesting. So if you have any question, you can ask. Or if there is no question, I would ask, sir, just one question from you.
Yes, sir.
It's you know, as corporate governance measures and mechanisms, we devise them, we plan them, because we want to have socially responsible organizations and to curb the corruption or tendency of corruption. But as they say, corruption is a tendency; it is not a quantum. So it is difficult to find out, to plan, to strategize such governance mechanisms which can stop and curb the tendency or corrupt tendency.
It's not only a rule book. As I said in one of my slides, it's all about the heart. It has to come from your heart. I mean, all of us have to probably change our mindset. It may probably take years. It may probably take centuries. I really don't know. But then all over the world, there are still scandals happening. It's not only in India. There are scandals happening all around. So end of the day, the mindset of the people have to change. They have to change their heart, that they are doing business and this business has to be for the general public good, and they have to enforce the various policies and practices of corporate governance, not only for survival, but for prospering. Slowly, the trend is changing, growing across the world, including that in India. And let's all hope that one time, one step at a time, and it all depends upon each one of us. Each one of us start following some of the good practices. I think self-governance is another important topic which is very useful to look at. Self-governance, corporate governance to baad mein aayega. Pehle, let us try to learn self-governance. How do I govern myself? Do I believe in the principle of ethics, fairness, trust, equity, accountability? And once you follow self-governance, then corporate governance becomes to that extent very easy. Similarly, CSR, corporate social responsibility. I think before that, there should be a concept of ISR, individual social responsibility. Each हम क्या कर रहे हैं? Each one of us, what we are doing for the society. Corporate तो बाद में करेगा. What is a corporate? Corporate is a combination. It's a multi-mix of various people. So CSR has to be thought of at the ISR level, individual social responsibility. So corporate governance comes later. First, it has to be self-governance.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a new idea, right? About when you speak about the individual social responsibilities, altogether new idea. I never heard of such things.
Yes.
So thank you very much. I take immense pleasure in proposing a vote of thanks for today's session. I was correct in the beginning when I said that today's session is going to be a musical odyssey with you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, you set the tone right from the beginning. You gradually started with the VUCA world, right? And then you spoke about and described nicely about the emerging trends, about the disruptive business models and all that. And I'm also impressed when you suggested and shared with us that this idea of corporate governance is not new to the Indian system. They were since the time immemorial, right? In the form of, so it's a kind of legacy. We should take it forward.
I know, absolutely.
Your ideas of the ESG organization about environmental, social, and governance-oriented systems, right? So that's also very important. I would suggest students to take care of all these words of wisdom. I must say, when he shared that 3 P's to be extended into the 4
I'll share
P's,
my presentation
people,
with you. I'll share
that
my
will be
presentation.
great, sir. That will be
So
great if you can share that.
Thank you
So
so much.
people, placement, profit, and pandemic. Thank you very much, sir,
Thank
for
you so
everything,
much.
for a
Thank
word
you.
of wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Gupta sir. Thank you,
Thank
Dean
you.
sir, and thank you, Raghavendra sir. And especially thanks to my dear students for attending the session. I hope you have been enlightened with the great thoughts of Gupta sir. And we will continue with few more sessions with sir so that we can have his knowledge sharing program and we can enhance our knowledge also. Thank you, sir.
And also thank my colleagues,
Thank
Dr.
you, sir.
Joshi, Dr. Malviya, and particularly the IT team, because nowadays, sir, everything is on online, virtual mode.
Everything went perfect.
IT people
No
are really
glitches.
working hard. Seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you, Akhilesh, and your team. Thank you very much.